listening to the Art of Homeschooling podcast, where we help parents cultivate creativity and connection at home. I'm your host, Jean Miller, and here on this podcast, you'll find stories and inspiration to bring you the confidence you need to make homeschooling work for your family. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome to episode 81 here on the Art of Homeschooling podcast. Today, I'm so happy to be joined by my mentor, Barbara Dewey, and we are talking all about the story of the Taproot Teacher Training. This summer training has been life-changing for so many people, and for the past 16 years, it's honestly been one of my favorite weekends of the year. So welcome back to the podcast, Barbara. Hello.
Hi, Jean. It's good to be here.
It's so great to have you. Barbara and I chatted way back in episode 2 here on the podcast. I had a conversation with my mentor when I first started out. And you can go listen to that. I'll put a link to it in the show notes if you're interested. I am going to give a quick intro to Barbara, and then we will dive in. So Barbara Dewey of Waldorf Without Walls consults with homeschooling families throughout the world, writes publications, provides training workshops, and spends her spare time enjoying her unique solar home and developing her farmland. Barbara, a master gardener, and her husband, Quimby, a forest entomologist, lead workshops and field days on the environment and backyard food production. She is the mother of 4, grandmother of 6, do I have that right? And great-grandmother of 2. Barbara holds an MS in Waldorf education from the Waldorf Institute of Sunbridge College in Spring Valley, New York, and she's been teaching in various settings since 1960. So impressive, Barbara. And most importantly, I would describe you as really the matriarch of the Waldorf homeschooling movement, because you were, as far as I know, you were the first consultant to homeschoolers. Yeah.
I think so. I almost got kicked out of the teacher training at Sunbridge because I told them that's what I was going to do. And of course, homeschooling was a no-no.
It's so interesting how it's changed over the years, because I had similar experiences at Waldorf homeschooling conferences where teachers were presenting, but, and they were accepting that we were trying to do this at home, but it wasn't fully embraced. Yeah, and it has changed so much over the years, which I am very happy to report. So, Barbara, I'm so excited to talk to you about Taproot today, because you really started it all, right? So let's first describe to the listeners, what is the Taproot Teacher Training? How would you describe it?
Well, it's a chance for parents who are homeschooling with Waldorf philosophy to get together for a weekend with people who have some experience doing it over the years and compare notes and get ideas and make them realize that home doesn't have to be a classroom, and how many things that are done in a Waldorf classroom are better done in a home because you have the real things right there to do it. For instance, making change and using money. You can take them to the store. You can't take 24 kids to a store, but you can take 2 or 3 or 4 kids to a store, and they learn a lot.
Yeah, so much of those real life experiences we can weave in, right? And that's one of the things I love so much about the Waldorf approach is that it's so hands-on. Yeah. It's so experiential. Yeah. And so to me, the Taproot Teacher Training is this lovely long weekend, right? A gathering of kindred souls, lots of fun. There's always so much laughter, which is really great. And I look at it as a combination of a retreat, time away from your usual. So a retreat, a homeschool training, and summer camp
Yeah.
all rolled into one. That's how I like to picture it. Yeah, so over 16 years ago, a wonderful group of parents gathered at Barbara's Taproot Farm for the very first ever Taproot Teacher Training. And I think from the beginning, we've had it from really Thursday through Sunday, right? Like a long weekend. And parents get to be the student for once. Yeah, and it's always been a small group. As we're recording this, one of the things that we are so excited about is that this year in 2022, we will be back in person at Camp Asbury in Hiram, Ohio for the first time in 3 years, which is just going to be so joyful. But even from the beginning, it's been a pretty small group. I mean, this year we might get upwards of, maybe 50 people, including the presenters. But on Barbara's farm, we were around maybe 20 people.
We were limited to 20,
Yes.
plus the presenters, but they had to sleep on the floor on mats, some of them, when we had 20.
Yeah, so when we first started at Barbara's farm, it was an even smaller group, and it was truly farm life, right? Like we would get up and go gather eggs from the chickens and, hike down by the pond. That was always a really, really fun experience. So my question for you, Barbara, is what inspired you to start this training?
Well, we needed a training for homeschooling parents because the experience that a lot of people, including Jean, had going to Sunbridge or the one in Ann Arbor or the one in Boulder, they were speaking to people who had a classroom with 24 children. And when the homeschoolers asked questions that involved homeschooling, the teachers had no idea how to answer them because it was not part of their experience. So at one point, Jean Campbell had a small training for parents at Toronto Waldorf School. Mm-hmm. And we slept on kindergarten mats in the kindergarten for that, unless we paid for a rather expensive hotel. And even the presenters were sleeping on mats in the kindergarten room.
I remember that experience.
Oh, yeah. And it was quite inexpensive. I think they charged like $200 for the whole weekend. And I wanted to do a similar thing. So after doing that with Jean for a couple of years, and not many Americans could go, it was a little easier to get across the border then than it is now. No way could you do it now. But she agreed that if I presented at hers and she presented at mine, we wouldn't charge each other. Mm-hmm. So I started one on our farm that made it easier for Americans to come to, and they slept. Some of them had beds, and some of them brought tents, and some of them just slept on mats on the floor and in one of the houses. We did have 3 houses available here: my own house and my daughter's house, and she wasn't living there at the time, and my son's house, who wasn't living there at the time either. So we did have a fair amount of space, but it still didn't sleep 25 or 30 people.
Yeah.
We cooked our own meals. Everybody had KP duty. We had a kitchen manager usually. The first few years, it was my granddaughter, who is now a chaplain in the Navy.
Oh my gosh.
On full duty, she starts this weekend.
Wow.
So that's where she has gone. Of course, a lot of years, 16 years. She's 32 years old now and is a minister in the Unitarian Church and now a chaplain in the Navy. But she was our kitchen manager, and she made sure everybody came to KP and that they cleaned up afterwards and all that stuff.
Yeah. I remember one summer my daughter Lila came and
She
cooked.
did it. Yeah, she did it with, was it with Robin?
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
did. Yeah, yeah. Those were the days.
Those were the days. So much fun. I was not a presenter the first year. I came actually as a participant that very first year when Jean Campbell came. And then the next year, I became a presenter, presenting some workshops about the grades. And there really was a need, and continues to be, I think, a need for a training aimed at homeschoolers as opposed to classroom teachers, because homeschooling is not school at home. It's very different, I think, than
Education, not schooling.
that's exactly. You know what? I say that to so many homeschooling parents I talk to in my one-on-one sessions and in my membership. I love to say, instead of describing ourselves as teachers, let's think of ourselves as our job is to facilitate activities, experiences. It's really much more about experiential learning, because I think when we start thinking, okay, we're going to teach this thing, then we get very controlling.
And your kids go.
Yeah, they do. They just gloss over, their eyes gloss over, and they aren't as engaged. And that's one of the things that has drawn me so much to the Waldorf approach from the beginning, is this idea of the lively arts, and that we can bring in poetry and music and movement and painting and drawing and all storytelling, all of these very active and engaging ways of bringing the learning. And that's the magic of Taproot, is that the parents get to experience that for once. Instead of reading about it on a page and then trying to do it with your child, come to Taproot and we can be the teacher and you could be the student for once. Yeah, beautiful thing. So we talked about starting in the summer of 2007. I think there were some years. I remember one year where there were only 7 participants. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we couldn't even pay ourselves.
Crazy. So Barbara had the training on her farm for, I should have looked this up, but at least what, 10 years, 9 years?
Yeah, it was about 9 or 10. I don't remember either.
Yeah. And then we moved to the Cuyahoga Valley Environmental Education Center. So Barbara and I both live in Ohio. She lives more in central Ohio, and I'm up in Cleveland on Lake Erie. So we moved to the Cuyahoga Valley, which is in between us. And then we were there for 3 years, I think.
Yep.
And then we moved to Camp Asbury in Hiram. And a summer camp is such a perfect spot for us. So we are so excited to go back there this year for the first time in 3 years, because we've been online during this pandemic, and now we're going back to camp. So let's talk about some favorite memories. What are some of your favorite memories or moments from Taproot's past that come to mind?
Well, one I think is getting up in the morning and picking lettuce and tomatoes and things like that for our meals, because we have big gardens here. Another one is one of our presenters now, whose oldest child is going to college this year, came one of those first years with her infant and 3 other children, and they camped up on top of the hill, and she washed out diapers under a pitcher pump, and and now she's one of our best presenters, and just has so much experience with homeschooling. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
So that's a happy memory.
And that baby is probably the one who volunteers to be the student in her demonstration videos, which is so much fun. Many things.
Yeah, he's about 12, 13, 14 years old, something like that.
Yeah. So that's Rebecca. And it's great to have her on board, because she's so good at teaching math and science. And I tend toward the language arts and history, right? So that's really fun. And I remember one summer when your dog Star got skunked. Remember that? And we're trying to keep Star out of the farmhouse and the barn and the solar house, and Star would have nothing to do with that. So I think we all smelled like skunk that whole
We did.
weekend. Yes.
It didn't go away.
Didn't go away. And there's so many things about Taproot, but I love getting up early. And this is true even now at Camp Asbury, just getting up early and going outside. At your place, it was out on the front porch of the farmhouse. And at Camp Asbury, there's a beautiful deck off the retreat center overlooking the forest and the fields. And there's a lake. Beautiful. Go out there with a morning cup of coffee. It's so much fun. And then for me, the big circles, the morning circle that we do with the whole group is so incredibly magical, and opportunities to sing beautiful rounds and do spiral walks and all kinds of wonderful fun activities. Yeah. And of course, yoga and nature walks and campfires and all the amazing workshops, which are really, really a beautiful thing. And we have such an amazing team now. We have a Taproot team of, I think, 12 people, including presenters and assistants.
Yep.
Yeah. So that has grown over the years, and almost everyone on the team originally came to Taproot as a parent, right? As a homeschooling.
Yeah.
As a homeschooling parent. So that's so wonderful. So what do you love the most about Taproot?
Just seeing people feel better about themselves and what they're doing and how they're doing it. It's so easy as a parent to just feel like, oh, I'm not very good at this. And but they kind of boost each other up and laugh at each other's mistakes and just have a really good time doing it. And I think that's what means as much as the learning that takes place, is the camaraderie among these people.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And then as you mentioned, a sense of confidence that comes from really mostly realizing that there's no one right way to do this. Right? There's so many ways to bring these wonderful activities to your home, and to gather with parents we've had parents as far away as Washington State, Puerto Rico, California, British Columbia, all over North America. And it is quite a gathering. And by the end of the weekend, that's so true. I think there's almost a transformation that people experience in their own journey as the leader in their families, right? And in their homeschools. Yeah, such a beautiful thing. Well, so for Taproot 2022, if those of you listening are listening in real time, we're recording this in the spring of 2022, and Barbara will be presenting workshops on kindergarten, on learning to read, which is a huge question that people often have, learning to read the Waldorf way. She's helping out with an astronomy workshop for the whole family, and I'm so excited that Quimby is coming. Your husband Quimby, he's one of the ones who's going to. Yes, so great. And then, of course, gardening and food production, which is something that Barbara has such a strong passion for, doing gardening with children. And I'll be doing language arts and history for the earlier grades 1 through 4, grades 5 through 8. I'll be doing Book Hearth with Allison, where we build a whole block around one book. That's so much fun to do. And then homeschooling high school, because we've been getting so many questions about that. And that's one of the ways I think, I'd love to hear your reflections on this, Barbara, too. One of the ways I think Taproot has evolved through the years, is that we've moved away from doing each grade in its own individual silo to really looking at the family unit, because so many of us have multiple ages, right? So how can we combine some blocks? How can we homeschool multiple ages at the same time without separately preparing for each individual grade? I think that's so important for the home setting.
Definitely. It's just so hard. Well, it's impossible if you have 5 children, you're going to memorize 5 stories and you're going to have 5 lessons. And what's the little one going to be doing while you're teaching your 6th grader?
Yes.
You just can't do it that way. But you can do a really successful program by combining a lot of things and exposing your younger ones to things maybe a little early, and having your older ones put up with the little ones to do something else for them.
Yeah.
That makes them less selfish about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And all in all, it makes for not just the learning, but it's the empathy and the living in a family and having good relationships with people and being the oldest who has to set an example and being the youngest who has to try to keep up and still feel good about himself. All of these things are really important learnings that kids don't get in a school where they're just isolated with their peers.
Yeah.
So it really makes a difference.
So true. I so often find myself saying, like, consider your family to be your community, right? Yep. Rudolf Steiner talked so much about, how his inspiration was to invite the teachers to create a community, right, in their classroom. And so as a family, we're a community. That's our community. And I remember you, Barbara, inspired me so much early on when you would make reference to the one-room schoolhouse. And that helped me so much to visualize my own homeschool as just a rich learning environment.
Yep.
That's a beautiful thing. So what are you looking forward to most this year for Taproot 2022?
Well, for me, some of these people are ones who came to that first year 16 years ago, and they had preschoolers that are going to college now. And I really like to keep up with these children and see what they're doing and how they're doing it and all that. So that's one of my big things. And of course, I always look forward to the people who are coming to kindergarten for the first time with just starting out. It's a real joy to see them wanting to do this and being willing to give their daily lives to their children and not give their children to some institution to get taught.
Yeah. And Barbara, I experience over and over again just so much love for you, for the people who are returning. Like, you have had such an impact on so many families, and that is beautiful.
It's a very good feeling, definitely.
Yeah. And then when the new families come too, I think you have a gift of helping people feel much more at ease. So when those parents who have kindergarten age children come to your workshops, I think they leave having a much different picture of what kindergarten at home might look like than perhaps they came with. And it's a much more relaxing and engaging and fun experience after they have taken your workshops. So thank you. It's so much fun to be doing this together. And so, after we moved Taproot from Barbara's farm, I started doing the organizing, which Barbara had done for years herself. And I have so enjoyed keeping this going. It is an amazing experience.
Well, you have the computer expertise and the technology to keep up with it. And I can't anymore.
Yeah.
You do a really good job with these podcasts, and your weekly newsletter and all of those things are really helpful to people.
Well, thank you. And it's so great to partner with you on the Taproot Teacher Training. I just love that we get to continue that together.
Yeah.
And okay, last question then, and we will be wrapping this up. So why would you recommend parents come to Taproot?
Well, mainly, I think to feel more comfortable about the whole process of homeschooling. The other thing is mothers and mothers-in-law and aunts and uncles who give you a hard time about what you're doing when you're homeschooling. Well, why don't you just send them to school? And they're not reading yet. What's the matter? And I think that's one of the things that people go away from this weekend realizing that people are sending their children off to college with no high school and no school record of any kind or grades of any kind. And they're going to really good schools. So it gives people the confidence to do it and the confidence to be able to explain to other people what they're doing and why.
Yes.
And I've seen so many people who had to start homeschooling during the pandemic because the schools were on again, off again, and the teachers weren't there, and the computer did, especially around here, computers just don't work.
In such a rural area.
Unless you pay a lot, and a lot of people around here can't afford that. And so they opted to homeschool, and some of them are really happy with it. Really happy with it. And their children are happier. And they're just, why didn't I do this sooner?
Yes.
So, that's the kind of thing that people come away with from this conference.
I love that. And like we mentioned before, I think there is a certain, not only confidence, but a sense of who we are as the leader, the homeschool parent in this whole family constellation. And it is amazing. I love that you brought that up, that probably at least a third, maybe even half of the presenters have now graduated children, right? And who have gone on to college and other post-secondary learning experiences. And that brings a real richness. There's so much experience in this team of presenters and such a variety too. Also, I will just underscore that feeling of that you're not alone, right? There are so many people all over the world bringing these wonderful experiential, hands-on, engaging approaches to their children at home. And it's a wonderful camaraderie. That sense of camaraderie is huge. And it's a whole lot of fun.
Yes.
We definitely know how to have fun. So a few tips here. You can find out more about Taproot by going to artofhomeschooling.com/Taproot. That's the general page, and it will then give you a link. So if you want to go find out more information about Taproot 2022 in particular, you can do that. I have a feeling that we're going to fill up quickly this year. And if you want to hear more from Barbara, you can go to her website, and she has some wonderful, really hands-on practical books that she sells there that she's written over at Waldorf-Inspired.com. And Barbara and I had a wonderful conversation. I called it a conversation with my mentor, Barbara Dewey, back in episode 2 of this Art of Homeschooling podcast. So you can go have a listen to that. And all of those links are in the show notes for this episode, which can be found at artofhomeschooling.com/episode 81. So wow. Barbara, yeah, I know. Thank you, Barbara, so much for joining me for this conversation. And I can't wait to see you at Taproot 2022 and help you set up the little kindergarten room and do some stargazing and sing some wonderful songs in a big circle.
Yes. What fun.
What fun. All right. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode. Bye for now. That's all for today, my friend. But here's what I want you to remember. Rather than perfection, let's focus on connection. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Art of Homeschooling podcast.